Hi, I'm Chris Colvin, and this is a weekly meeting that we have it in the house called GC Casual Friday. It's primarily for general counsel, although during the current coronavirus pandemic, we're sort of opening it up to others that may want to contribute or participate. So we have a little broader audience or group than we sometimes have. Really excited today to be here with my co-host David Slater, who co-hosts this weekly meeting, and also Julia Shapiro, who's the CEO and founder of Hire and Esquire. And I'll let Julia tell you a little bit more about the work that she does and why I think it's so relevant to the current time period we're in. Just as a brief introduction, give a couple views that I have on the current situation. Obviously, this is a time of great concern for all of us. A lot of us are very worried about the health of our family and friends and colleagues and the impact on the economy. I also do think it's a time trying to look for some silver linings during this difficult period. I do think it's a time for existing leaders to demonstrate their leadership, and that includes legal department leaders. And I also think it's a time for new leaders to emerge. So times of crisis can be times of opportunity. And I think it's especially a time of opportunity for legal innovators. So if you're a lawyer who inclines towards embracing innovation and change, not only in technology, but in terms of staffing and in terms of in-house legal procedures and operations, I think it's actually a really interesting, although scary time. So I welcome people to think about innovation and think about the impact that they can make. One last thing I'd like to say is that this is a time that will be remembered for the rest of our lives. So I think it's a time to really think about how you conduct yourself, how you treat the members of your legal staff and others within your group of colleagues that you work with, because how you conduct yourself today really will be remembered for years to come. So it's sort of like my parents used to talk about the day that JFK was shot. My own experience was sort of living through 9/11, living 2 blocks away from where that happened. And this is another one of those times we're always going to remember. So it's really important to conduct yourself in a way that you'll be proud of for years to come, and that is about serving those people, whether they're your internal clients or whether they're the legal staff that report to you and others that you deal with. So on a somewhat somber note, but hopefully a hopeful note for those of you who are interested in doing the best that we can during these circumstances. So I would like to stop talking and introduce Julia Shapiro. If you don't mind just telling us a little bit about what you do, Julia, at your company, and then sort of going through the topic we discussed.
Sure. I'm the founder and CEO of Hire and Esquire, which is an online legal staffing platform. We help law firms and in-house legal departments and legal service companies connect with an on-demand workforce and also sometimes a permanent workforce, but the majority of our work is for flexible on-demand roles. And currently, we've been in business for almost a decade. We started we should say, at the pit of the last recession.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, we've all seen some boom times since then, but what I'll be talking about today is we very much have seen many of the legal budget and efficiency changes that took root in the last recession continue to accelerate through boom times. So echoing what Chris said, now is definitely the time for legal innovators and to get in on the ground floor of some things that are going to be done and become commonplace over the next decade, even as we most likely come out of whatever economic fallout there is from the current circumstances.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Julia. And I know Julia has a slide deck she'd like to get through, and feel free to start sharing that when it's convenient, Julia. And I just want to note, feel free to ask questions. You can unmute yourself and ask questions. And you can also post a question in the chat window. So I'll try to keep my eye on the chat window in case people want to ask questions that way. Thank you.
Yes, and David, it would be helpful. I'm sorry, Chris, it would be helpful
That's
if
okay.
you could call those out because I will have the deck up and won't be seeing the
Absolutely. I've got it right here in front of me, so I'm going to try to keep my eye on the chat window.
Perfect. So the topic of this presentation is preparing your legal department for the next new normal. I'm sure, I don't know how many of you here were GCs during the last recession, 2008, probably 2011, 12, before we started climbing out of it. I don't know if there's a show of hands or I guess there's not a poll available, but if any of you were GCs or practicing law at law firms, I'm sure you remember after 2008 in law, we're having what we call we had what we called the new normal, which was when people, to some extent, accepted that things weren't going to go back to the way they were in the practice of law and the business of law in the past recession. And now a lot of lawyers were asking themselves this question in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. And I think everyone's asking this question now, which is, when is everything going to go back to normal? And I use Mad Men here because I don't know how many people are Mad Men fans, but if you are, you aren't. Mad Men was about an advertising agency through the times of 1960 through 1970, and a lot of both the social and business turmoil that happened then. And I think it tracks actually very well to the law firm experience of and the legal experience of how things have changed over our last decade. And at one point, as during the show series, you're getting towards the 70s and things are in complete social upheaval, Roger Sterling asks, when is everything going to go back to normal? And of course, the answer to that question is things were never going to go back to the 1950s, 60s era that men like Roger Sterling were used to. And I think the same thing is true for law right now. We're never going backwards. We're never going back to the pre-2008 way that the business of law was practiced. I think we can all accept to some extent, especially after the past couple of weeks, that the change is the new normal. And all of us, regardless of if we're in law or another profession, we have to be able to change. And so I wanted to go back just for some perspective, which I think is really important right now, to trends pre-COVID. And I'm going to go back kind of far. I'm going to go back to, again, our Mad Men era, the 1950s and 60s, and maybe even a bit the early 70s. So professional service relationships in the past were very stable. And this was true in law as well, up until actually probably the 90s and early 2000s. Companies' business was more likely to stay with the same law firm and the same law partner for decades. In all jobs, not just in law, you had longer career tenures, you had buying and selling parties staying in the same roles, and leadership looked longer term and less towards quarterly profits. There was also less budget scrutiny. There was a very different tax structure pre-1980 that actually didn't incentivize necessarily eking out every penny the way it did when you had a lower tax structure. And I would say that this was somewhat of the shift in the 80s when shareholders, especially of public companies, were focused on cutting every inch of cost. This happened, post 80s, and this was not the atmosphere beforehand. And just again, to put this all in a larger perspective of things, and I will say before this, last night I'm at my parents' house right now and watching the History Channel with my dad about the Cold War, and it kind of put things in perspective of like the world has been through a lot of catastrophes, and we've come through it. And I think the same thing is true of what happened to the greater business world that law was immune to for a long time. In the 1970s and 80s, we had globalization, there were new international markets, there was outsourcing, costs were lowered in manufacturing. And again, this that I talked about on the last slide, you had maximizing shareholder value as a prime goal for companies. And everyone was adopting lean processes, globalization, outsourcing. And this started to hit white collar jobs even in the 1980s and early 90s. And law was fairly immune to this at first. Our legal budgets remained relatively protected, partly because our industry was so regulated. Legal was kind of a black box for a lot of companies previously. And it was a very slow to adopt to change. Our industry is very slow to adopt change. So there weren't as many alternatives either for the CFO or somebody else at the company to go look at cutting costs. So then we get to 2008, which is probably another one of those moments that I think everybody remembers. I know I was fresh out of law school when this happened, so I remember it very well. But the Great Recession created this new normal. And I'm sure many of you have probably seen this in your legal departments already. Before the recession, we already saw e-discovery rising as a way for technology and alternative legal service providers to come in to get a piece of the pie of the legal market. And these operations were already established before the recession, and they were poised pretty well for growth by 2008. And of course, the recession accelerated legal budgets, budget pressure and trends, and there was a huge drop in demand for legal services initially, and there were way too many lawyers. Law schools were overproducing lawyers. They still kind of are, but enrollment has dropped and other measures have been taken. And basically, clients in every single way were in the driver's seat to demand change. And I don't know how well, I'm sure most people on this call, if you're in the GC community, probably very familiar with the rise of legal operations that's happened since 2008. This became a very strict in-house discipline at large companies, and a lot of non-lawyer parties and non-strictly law firm parties were brought into the business of law at this point for project management, technology, and finance. So something, I'm showing you these because I think it's important to be aware of what is going to continue to happen in your legal department long after the pandemic is past. So 2008 to 10, the demand for law firms was negative. So what this means is that those of you in corporate functions were increasing your legal spend as we came out of the recession, but you weren't spending it with law firms. And more often than not, in my guess from my many conversations with GCs and knowledge of the market, a lot of this was pressure from other stakeholders at your company. So GCs began outsourcing more work to vendors as they increased their legal budget. And a lot of you started to put your budget on contract and temporary lawyers and pushing work to paraprofessionals. And a lot of you started to use legal labor outsourcing at this point as well, and maybe often as an alternative to an associate at a law firm. Just a quick rise of all the ALSPs that have come up since the last recession. And I thought I've done a ton of research on this area of law, obviously, on this area of the market, and I talk to GCs every day, I talk to law firm partners every day. And this quote very well summed up everything I had seen anecdotally in all of the market research reports that I had read, which was that a fundamental shift is now well underway. Clients have taken decisive control of the market and are demanding improved efficiency, predictability, and cost effectiveness. This was from a 2020 report released in January from Georgetown Law and Thomson Reuters Legal Executive Institute. So the pre-COVID 2020 outlook was already very much going towards all of these trends that we've spoke of, with very competitive procurement processes, a lot of recording and detailing of expenses, project management, a lot of strict requirements there, and a widespread disaggregation of legal services. We're looking at deregulation. A lot of these things have currently been paused if you're reading the legal news right now. A lot of the decisions on deregulation, at least in California, are being paused, and expecting other jurisdictions to follow that already haven't gotten on board. Utah and Arizona already had some changes being made, but that's probably going to further accelerate trends. And I do want to just stop here for a second, because I know a lot of people have said they're worried about their own careers and their jobs. And that's obviously a very valid concern. I think all of us are a little worried about our jobs and our economic prospects now on all ends of the economic spectrum. And one thing that I do want to note from these trends, for those of you who are in-house, if your company does go out of business, if they do eliminate your legal department, I would encourage a lot of you to look outside the box of other GC jobs. I do think there will be a time when GC jobs obviously return, the economy will pick up again in a few years. But I wouldn't forget that these alternative service providers are probably going to continue to grow and be even more prominent, both with deregulation eventually, once we get back around to that again, as well as just with how the legal market will change. So there could be a really interesting role for you as a GC or somebody in-house to go to a legal service company. You really understand your clients well. And so don't forget about those options if you do have to conduct a job search in the next couple of months or years.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. It's also a related topic, I think, is sort of skills development. So it'd be a great time, if you can afford it, to get some education on, for example, NYU has a great one-year cybersecurity master's degree that's tailored to lawyers. So if you have the flexibility and the ability to do that, that's another great thing to do. Is cybersecurity is one of many areas that are sort of hot, and some retraining. So you can come back stronger, hopefully, to that GC role after some time doing something else, perhaps.
Exactly.
And Julia, what are some of the things that attorneys should think about in terms of working for ALSPs, alternative legal service providers? What are some of the skills and qualifications they're looking for, and how does an attorney get involved with an organization like that?
So I think we all know this who've been in the world for long enough. It's always important to network and to keep your networks up even when you're working. and be thinking about what happens next. I'll note that the average length of a job for an associate is 3 years or less. And I think while in leadership roles, the turnaround might be slower than that, there's still definitely within 5 years, even leadership roles are moving to different jobs and moving between companies. So I think always keeping your network up is very important, especially even with your vendors, as well as with your outside counsel, everybody in the legal industry. What Chris said about playing nice, I think is very true all the time, not just during COVID. I think it depends on what your specialty is and what your focus is when you're in a GC role. And a lot of that depends on the company. From our various clients and people that I talk to in GC roles, it seems that often depending on the company, somebody with one strength might be hired over another strength. Like if it's a security company, or if it's something that's focused on privacy compliance, they might have an attorney, they might hire somebody or an associate they worked with, or somebody within the legal community who has that specialty. So I think when you look at ALSPs, a lot of ALSPs are doing different things like contract management, privacy, GDPR compliance, and a lot of outsourcing of those functions that used to be done by a law firm. So I think that the GC should look at their strength and see what they're really good at and what they're doing now, and then look at the different options out there in different companies and see where they would best fit. And there's a lot of also just broad ALSPs that are essentially in many ways replacing the law firm. They do like 20 different things. They're doing contracts management, they're doing compliance. They have highly skilled associates, junior partner level attorneys that are going into the in-house department. So I think there's something for everyone, and it's really important to think about what your core competency is and look for an ALSP that has a department or a function that matches that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information online. I mean, like anything, a lot of this information can be found online, and you'll find guides to different ALSPs. So there's a lot of summaries of who's doing what, and so it's not hard to find, especially now when a lot of us are working from home and we're not, we save a couple hours in commutes, for example, use that time to investigate. I would add, Julia, also, I think sometimes it's hard for lawyers to ask. We're used to being the answer people, and if you don't ask, you don't get. So reach out to friends and colleagues who have gone to ALSPs, ask about their experience. They'll probably maybe have more time to talk with you than usual. And it's a time, I'll also say, it's a time when it's okay to be a little concerned about your career. It's not a badge of shame when, there may be some significant cuts in legal departments. There's no embarrassment in reaching out and say, look, I'm concerned about the current environment. I certainly hope my department turns around and does well, but I'd be remiss if I weren't reaching out and networking. And people will understand that, especially right now.
Yes, and somebody put a great comment in the site on chat that they said they moved into an operations and business development role along with legal. And again, with expanding your skill set, I see that a lot at our emerging companies. We have a high volume of our legal departments have 1 to 5 attorneys. So it's somebody who's in charge of coming in and setting up things from the beginning. And they might be the first person, the first legal hire. So having that diverse skill set where you can help with operations is probably going to position you very well for a place in the door at an emerging company, if that's what you want. And I will remind you that great companies come out of recessions. If you are looking at maybe going into a smaller, riskier legal department, Google started during the recession of the early 2000s. I believe Facebook started coming out of that period as well. I'm not saying those are great companies. I'm just saying they would be great legal departments to have been on ground floor in, especially from an options perspective. So I would also just keep your eyes open for what the new emerging opportunities are in new companies that are getting funded and maybe bringing their first legal hire in the door. And as was commented in chat, if you do have those operations and business development skill sets, you're very attractive for those types of roles. And one thing I will note too, one of our investors in Hire and Esquire was Google's lawyer number 2. And she actually said something very interesting, that a lot of the early lawyers in the door at Google were very diverse. They were women and minorities, because at the time, this might have changed a little bit, but at the time, the more traditional people were being promoted to partner at the big law firms. And they thought, why am I going to go work for this rinky-dink startup when I can be partner and be making millions of dollars? So what she told me is that attorneys like her, who weren't as traditionally chosen for partner weren't able to get into the law firm club had a lot less to lose. So they went and they took the riskier move, and it worked out very well for them. So at this point, where there might be less to lose and less other job opportunities that are very stable and safe and look like a steady paycheck, it might be the time to consider something a little bit more risky if that's something you think you have the appetite for. So also, I'm going to the next slide, which is my prediction of what's ahead. I'm guessing based on all of the trends from the past. I think this recession has the potential to be worse than 2008. And I think legal departments will once again be expected to do less with more. And the cost cutting and efficiency trends that began previously that we've been seeing over the past 12 years are only going to accelerate further. And I am curious to hear from the group. Have you, in the last, this whole thing snuck up on us in the last 3 weeks, have there been any new efficiency measures implemented at your firms yet or already that you noticed?
Just a reminder, everyone's muted, so if you want to unmute yourself and chime in, feel free.
Okay,
Yeah,
we're getting
I
some
think
Go ahead.
for my client where I'm a GC, the accounting department has contacted us and said they want to be very careful about new expenditures. You know, what legal costs are we incurring, and almost they want to see an approval process over what types of legal work or expenditures we want to do. So that's something new that we're experiencing.
Yeah, and I talk like you, Julie. I talk to GCs every week, and one thing I'm hearing is that the people that had pre identified as innovative GCs, these people are obviously concerned along with everyone else, but they also see opportunity that finally this is their opportunity to reallocate some budget to ALSPs, do more AFAs. I think the people that were already inclined in that direction now see a green light from management to start to pursue those different types of alternative ways of doing things. And the sort of, the old, very old school way of saying, well, I'm just going to hire AmLaw because that's what we've always done. I think that attitude is declining, that sort of people are realizing that we're all in a risk environment of risk now. So it's impossible to reduce risk to zero. So now it's a smart time to try new things. Sort of like you're saying with career, that's true in careers, but it's also true within legal departments as a whole, I think.
Oh, completely. And none of the changes that went through in the last decade or so would have been able to go through, I think, if there hadn't been a major recession and cost cutting.
I think that's right. And this one's going to enable more of it, and maybe it's hitting more industries, I think, than the last one. So.
Agreed. And a great comment in the side on chat again is that they see their company taking control of things and their legal department taking things back in house, which again is, as you'll see as I go through this a little further, is very much what happened in the last recession and then continued through boom times. So a few things if you are looking for how can you trim your legal budget. Again, legal departments might not have control if your company's in a risky position now. Now is not a good time for overall survival. And I don't think that anyone should take that burden on their back for the whole company. Obviously, you just don't have that much control. But to make your legal department more efficient and help that way, I'm going to go through some of the trends that happened over the last decade that I think, one, we're going to see more of, and two, can be inspiration or guidance for how you can change things within your legal department to cut costs and help your legal department decide what's next. So I don't know if people can do hand raise, but I'm guessing the answer is going to be almost 100%. But how many people are familiar with alternative fee arrangements? Everybody. Yeah, it's a lot different than when I ask lawyers at law firms. So you probably all know this, but I'll just run through it really quickly. And there is quite a few different interpretations of alternative fee arrangements. Some people, when I talk to a lot of law firm partners, they seem to think that an alternative fee arrangement is fixed fee, which there's a lot of different alternative fee arrangements. So I will just run through some definitions and how people view AFAs, because it's definitely flexible depending on how you talk to. So what is an alternative fee arrangement? these are notes from some profitability officers and other people in the industry. It's hourly arrangements such as blended rates, volume discounts, and David Freeze says for an AFA, it to be an AFA, there needs to be an element of cost certainty, risk sharing, or aligned interest. Patrick Lamb says it's just an alternative to the billable hour, not a different flavor of the cost plus model. And he thinks that discounted rates and blended rates do not count as AFAs. I found a lot of people who have a very strong opinion that way as I was doing research. So while there's a lot of different ideas, what everyone seems to agree upon, or where there seems to be the most consensus, is that a true AFA includes project scoping, so it's not just the lawyer running wild with how many hours they bill. Risk sharing, so the case could settle quickly. Somebody, you might end up overpaying your vendor or law firm a little bit, but at the same time, if the case doesn't settle quickly and is drawn out, your lawyer or your vendor might miss out a little bit, and you probably save some money.
I agree. I agree with David Freeze, except I would have changed his or to an and. So I think you need all three of these to be a true AFA and to please if you're an outside lawyer, to please your client.
Yes, completely. And aligned incentives is the other thing too, is the third one. It's the attorney shouldn't have an incentive to just spend as much time as possible. And the clients shouldn't necessarily have an incentive either to just like run up the bill and take up as much of your time as possible with only paying you a bottom rate. And I will say, when I talk to partners, law firm partners a lot and clients a lot, and it seems like nobody's happy when like if the price is too low. I know a lot of GCs that will deny bids that look too low because they know that once the funds run out and the case is horribly unprofitable, they start getting responsiveness from their law firms if it's been from whatever the arrangement is. And then often, law firms also don't want that to happen. So everyone kind of loses if it's a really lopsided arrangement where one person really loses and the other person really wins. Or doesn't win, actually. Nobody wins. So here are some popular types of alternative fee arrangements. There's portfolio pricing. So you bundle all of your related legal work together and you give that all to one law firm generally for some form of discount. Sometimes it's fixed fee. Sometimes it is a discounted rate if they take all of the work. And then it can be based on contingencies, work volume, or duration. We see this a lot with insurance clients. So I don't know how many people are in-house in an insurance company, but that seems to be very, very popular with insurance companies. Successor contingency. This is your typical plaintiff claims, personal injury. And law firms are increasingly open to this, and I'll show you on the next slide. There's also kind of a more defense clients are able to take advantage of something of a successor contingency. And it's best for law firms, again, so that they're not having completely unprofitable cases and being demotivated to work, is that they spread it across a variety of portfolio cases. Okay, we've got the caller, fixed fee, and caller. So there's kind of an over-under arrangement with how much is billed. And again, one side can benefit a little bit, generally, depending on where things land on the caller, over under. Fixed fee plus success fee, we're seeing this a lot more in defense litigation. When a case can be fairly well scoped out, and often when they say fixed fee for a case, it's fixed by phase of the case. So it'll be different phases. So it's not, who knows what will happen in the case, and we're quoting you a fixed fee at the beginning. But increasingly, clients will say, okay, we'll give you this fixed fee, and then if you win, you get this bonus. So we're definitely seeing a lot more of that than we saw, even 5 years ago. Again, we've got a reduced hourly rate success fee, which is a little bit of a different flavor of the flat fee plus success fee. And then the reverse contingency model that I was talking about, that we are seeing a lot more in corporate, or some flavor of almost reverse contingency where we have the success fee and lower rates. So these are all things that you can think about and adopt, as well as obviously technology efficiencies and looking at other vendors and ALSPs, which we spoke about more in the beginning of the presentation, to help make your legal budget more efficient. I just heard that I am not heard as well right now. I don't know if this is better.
No, it sounds good. I think
Okay.
I can definitely hear you very well. So
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, my headset's been getting a workout over the past 2 weeks. So
Exactly.
and there's a very long delay to get a new one on Amazon right now.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to point out, in the past, AFAs were tended to be adopted by larger law firms that had more leverage to demand them. So you can see the larger the revenue, the more AFAs they were getting for their portfolio or for their total legal work. I do want to point out that even if you're part of a smaller legal department, smaller legal departments are going to have more buying power now, because you're not the only one that's getting hurt. Your vendors, your law firms, their business is going down, and they're going to be more open to work with you, even if you're a smaller legal department. Another thing too that we've seen a trend. So at Hire and Esquire, our fastest growing market segment is law firms of 1 to 20 attorneys. And we have a lot of former big law partners who started their own firm to be more flexible. They might take an associate and a paralegal with us. They use a lot of flexible contractors. And what we've seen is they do a high volume of flat rate work for their clients. They're often taking their large clients or some work from their large clients with them. So if you're a small in-house legal department, I would really urge you to look at a smaller law firm where you're going to get more attention than if you go to a big law firm. I mean, I worked with big law firms in the past. I'm sure a lot of you did too. You know how clients are treated when they're only like tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars of clients versus their billion-dollar clients. So when you go with a smaller law firm, and you can, again, often get talent that's come from the top law firms, or just people, pedigree isn't everything, or just lawyers that are really good. I'd ask for recommendations, talk to your network. You're often going to be a much more important client, and your spend is going to be a much bigger part of their total revenue for the year, whereas you don't mean a whole lot to a big law firm. So they're going to be more flexible with you and looking at fee arrangements that work. They can also, law firms are the one business that do not get more efficient with scale. So you're also going to just have built-in efficiencies by going with smaller law firms. And again, they're just overall going to be much more attentive to you than at a larger firm where, you know, we all know this, a lot of your work gets kicked down to a junior associate who doesn't really know what they're doing without much supervision, and they're learning on your dollar. And you're not in as much of a position to negotiate or push back against that as a smaller client at a big firm. So definitely encourage everybody to, regardless of the size of your law firm, to go with a law firm for the parts of your work that you're sending to law firms that will work with you, that will look at fair fixed fee rates with you or alternative fee arrangements, and will be attentive versus just throwing all your work to a large firm.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I just add a footnote to that, which is especially if you're not a giant company. So if you are a Fortune 100 company or something, you may get the attention of the biggest partners at the biggest firms. But if you go down just even a little bit in size and the amount of legal work you're handing to a firm in a given year, the work will get pushed down. And what happens, and this is my opinion, but a lot of, I think, GCs I've spoken to share this view. If you're not in that very top tier of very large legal departments handing out millions and millions of dollars of business each year, you're basically if you go with big law firms, you're basically subsidizing the training of the inexperienced lawyers, and you're not getting the best minds. And nothing wrong with the young lawyers, they need to learn, but why should that be subsidized by small to medium-sized clients? And I think that's what ends up happening in too many cases. And
Completely. Like,
I don't even blame the law firms. It's their business model. They can't be at the top of the AmLaw list unless they have very high partner rates and very high leverage of inexperienced lawyers.
like many things, the people that can least afford it have to subsidize it.
Exactly. That's what happens. So that's what happens when small companies, or even pretty big companies, but not huge companies, go with exclusively with big law firms.
Exactly. I think all of us at law firms have seen that happen firsthand. And then if we've been clients at big law firms, we've seen the same thing happen. And this is just an idea when you're thinking about alternative fee arrangements. Some things are really hard to do on an alternative fee arrangement, especially if it's not scoped out and phased by project. But this will give you something of an idea of, and we can share this deck afterwards, of where AFAs are most used or what areas might be the ripest to use AFAs. Obviously, finance and investments is a huge one. So is labor and employment. And then obviously IP and patent, IP trademark, insurance, although sometimes I don't think insurance is too well set for that. It's demanded by the clients, not to the best end. Mergers and acquisition, and we see less surprisingly in commercial contracts, which I think is an area that's better for AFAs, but The other thing too, another trend we've seen is more people outsource their contract work to ALSPs. There's a lot of ALSPs that specialize in volume contract review. So I think that might be part of the reason they're not used as often, because there are other arrangements that might not be counted, because this is from a law firm survey. And then the dollar values and ALSPs do track fairly closely to their high usage, although obviously there are some lower value practice areas that are also lower, that track to lower volume dollar volumes. So that's what I have. That's mostly what I have put together on this. I'm happy to answer any questions or just open it up for discussion on what people are interested in discussing further right now.
Well, first of all, Julia, excellent presentation, really timely, really relevant. So thank you. I really appreciate that. And anybody,
Yes.
I'll keep an eye on the chat window. Anyone want to ask a question out loud?
Julia, maybe you could talk a little bit about what we had discussed last week, the idea of regulations of ALSPs and the idea of practicing law. And, you know, some of these other ALSPs got into a little bit of trouble where they were deemed to be practicing law, even though they didn't, you know, they weren't lawyers, and or they were managed by non-lawyers. And I know that you've worked a lot in your business model with Hire and Esquire to kind of solve these regulatory issues, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
So I think so. One company that was about, I guess it was almost 2 months ago now, that shut down was in violation of fee sharing rules. And they were, I wouldn't say they were necessarily an ALSP. They were another, like, they were connecting consumers with lawyers, and they were taking a cut in violation of fee sharing rules. And
Who are they again?
I don't know if I should say that.
Oh, okay, all right,
You could
all
Google it,
right.
figure it out
Yeah,
pretty quick.
it was
I think
pretty big in the
I
legal
think it's a
news, though,
pretty
of
big
course.
company. Yeah, it's kind of out there in public, but
Yeah,
okay.
everyone's forgotten by now with everything else. But we worked very hard. We are set up and structured as a staffing agency, which is allowed under the model rule 5.4 around fee sharing. There's an ABA opinion that says, you know, if it's a placement and staffing agency, they can operate. That's why there's been, you know, Robert Half, Kelly Law, Axiom, all of these major
Mhm.
companies that have, and many publicly traded companies that have provided legal staffing for decades with no issue. Some startups decided to do the easier to ask forgiveness than permission model and started connecting clients and attorneys. So the one that I talked about, which was the major one, was out of business. A lot of lawyers in California got letters from the Bar Association who had been registered with them. I don't think it's a big point to warn people on right now who are GCs who might be looking to pick up extra work because it's not in business anymore. But that is something you have to be aware of if any marketplaces are connecting you with clients. There are some that are done legitimately that are, you know, charging you a fee, and it's a flat fee, and it's advertising and not taking a cut of the transaction. But that is something that people should be aware of. The one thing that I see really changing the dynamic, though, that is on hold now, as I mentioned, like California is holding back their vote or their decisions. There's been a lot of different jurisdictions are looking at regulatory reforms to open up the law to non-law firms, the practice of law to non-law firms. So Utah has a regulatory sandbox set up. Arizona is looking to do something similar. They're also allowing non-lawyers to help consumers in limited areas starting in November, and they're having a training program for them. California, there was an uproar. Everyone expected California to go first. It's not anymore. It's badly lagging behind. California was going to vote on a regulatory sandbox to allow non-law firms to operate in limited scopes. All of these things were initiatives for access to justice to help consumers and others who can't access legal services have more access to legal services. And the effect was that it is most likely going to provide a doorway for the Big Four, which is
Mhm.
something else you should probably keep on your job search list, is the Big Four.
Yes.
Your GC. It's going to provide a gateway for the Big Four and alternative legal service providers to either actively practice law or take even more business away from law firms. So again, California is holding back its vote and decision now based on COVID, and we're expecting some delay from other other jurisdictions that were considering similar initiatives based on everything that's going on. But it's still a matter of time before there's likely some regulatory reform like there was in the UK, where non-law firms could get alternative business service licenses, and there was limited licenses passed out to different organizations to practice law. And it's actually worked out. It's caused a ton of innovation in the UK. The UK
Yeah.
is obviously a much smaller market than the US, but a lot of different things have changed. I think for the better, and we've seen more companies do more interesting things with legal tech and legal innovation there because of the Tesco Act is what they called it, because it was Tesco's like a major grocery store chain there, and they were going to be opening up like little legal services within grocery stores like there are banks. So they called it the Tesco Act. But since the Tesco Act, there's been a lot of legal innovation in the UK. I think in the US within 5 years, we're probably going to see that here. And once again, more interesting job prospects for everybody on this call are probably going to be
Yeah.
through ALSPs in the Big Four.
I agree with that. Like I like Julie, I studied the legal innovation and the market for legal services, and I think of it as sort of the Big Four's got kind of a top-down approach. They already have very strong C-suite relationships in the largest companies, basically every large company in the United States. That's a top-down. The bottom-up is sort of the startup ALSPs and the disruption that they're causing. And I think we're also starting to increasingly see alliances between the Big Four and certain ALSPs. So they're meeting. And unfortunately for some law firms, I think big law firms will always have a role because I call them kind of the fighter planes. They're the ones you call in for the really tactical missions to get something done. But I think they're a limited purpose. They'll become a limited purpose tool rather than a general purpose tool. And I think especially the Big Four, but increasingly the ALSPs are just so much better run. They're run the way an MBA would run an operation, not the way a lawyer would run an operation. And so they're going to I think it's going to be difficult for law firms to compete once this really gets going and once the regulatory landscape shifts.
Chris, can I just add on this that
Sure.
what basically is happening outside of the US, actually the Big Four in most countries are the leading law firms because they have deep pockets. They're allowed to provide legal advice. Obviously, they're allowed to provide legal services and have all the C-suite relationships. And yes, like you said, they deal with things in they bring all the professional capabilities that they have. So it is happening. The US is the only place it's not happening is because of the regulation.
Yeah, and it could be, I also kind of think it could be a little bit like a lot of legal changes we've had where it seemed to take forever and then it suddenly happens quickly, like something, I mean, very distant areas, but like legalization of gay marriage happened very quickly after taking a really long time. Cannabis legalization is suddenly happening very quickly after a long debate of decades. So this could be another one of those situations where it's all of a sudden happening, especially now with the changes. Even though I think you're right, Julia, the pause button has been hit on everything, including deregulation, but I feel like it could rapidly accelerate. That's just my own view.
Somebody put an interesting question in the corner that we dealt with very recently. Any thoughts on how doc review is going to be reconfigured in the post-COVID area, especially with more in-house reviews, more at-home reviews? Yes, I think that was already happening. Only about 15% of the work we do at Hire and Esquire's doc review, 85% of the work is more like associate level, paralegal, junior partner, even expert level work. But from our doc reviews, since we have a lot of small firms and a lot of agile growing firms, a lot of our document review was already at home. We could get remote reviews spun up very quickly. We had good reviewers, the go-to reviewers, and it was a lot more cost affordable. It was a lot more affordable. People are willing to work for a little bit less if they can work in their home versus having to go into a doc review center and commute. And it's not a very pleasant environment if you've ever worked in one of those generally. And I will say in a post-pandemic era, there are great places for germs to spread. One person gets sick in that room, whether it's the flu or a stomach bug, and everyone has it. Right. So already we were seeing from small agile firms and even in-house legal departments, they were fine with with at-home reviews. And we spun up like a 60-person remote review team once very quickly, and it went really well. At Hire and Esquire, we screen attorneys for soft skills. We have a behavioral psychologist as part of our team. And over 4 years, we've built an iterated soft skill assessment. So we actually assess traits of who works best remotely. So we've used that, but we've had great success with remote doc reviews, and we have quite a few clients that use that. We had an on-site doc review going on with 20 people, and then COVID hit, and the client and everybody agreed to switch them to home. So I think we're seeing that happen. A lot of the doc review software has really good security and monitoring built in. So I think it's probably going to accelerate, and people are going to be like, oh, wow, we did this and the world didn't blow up and the review went well and nothing happened. So I do have a feeling it will probably accelerate.
Can I, unless others have questions, can I ask you two, because we're getting short on time, and I have a couple questions I'd love you to cover. One is, if legal departments unfortunately are looking to downsize, would you be open to talking to some of the people that might be exiting to help them make a soft landing potentially, or give them advice? Number one. And number two, what role do you see AI playing in both staffing and doc review and related areas there? Is that still in the future, or is it happening now?
I have lots of thoughts on the second question. First question, of course, everyone's always free to reach out to me. I have a lot of those conversations. Sometimes we'll have clients that turn into attorneys and vice versa. So we're always love to talk to great attorneys and discuss what's out there and what's coming next. As for AI, first of all, I did write an article on this on LinkedIn about why we don't use AI and how basically a lot of it is, there's a lot of false claims of use of AI in the legal industry.
Right.
A lot of what people are claiming as AI is basically an algorithm or like an intern behind the scenes. I think one company got totally busted for that. It was basically interns doing everything they said was AI, or I should say machine learning. So the true definition of artificial intelligence is something that was done by a human in the last generation. So by that, a calculator was AI.
Mm-hmm.
At one point, and Microsoft Word was AI. Maybe it still is. So there's artificial intelligence, which is kind of pretty loose definition and can be anything that we used to do. Like contract review used to be done by humans, and now you can have an algorithm pull out like pertinent clauses really easily. So that technically, maybe that's AI. Machine learning is where it is kind of scary, because it is actually in some ways the machine developing a consciousness and learning based on past data. From my opinion, one of the only companies that's really doing true AI well is Google.
Mm-hmm.
Even other larger companies that are trying to do AI initiatives are not doing that well. So I would say maybe Facebook to an extent, and Google, because they have enough data. So most people though who are claiming to do machine learning really aren't. You have to have like Facebook and Google level data to do truly good machine learning. And you quite frankly also have to have the talent and the organizational will. There's another huge company that I won't name again that I know a lot of people in the AI field, and we discuss this a lot, AI and machine learning, and people inside that company as well, who are like, it's a huge company and it doesn't know what it's doing with machine learning.
Can I just add, that's IBM Watson, actually. They've had their system for a while, and I know that even as we try to use it from a business perspective, it's a long way from where it needs to be. So I know they're pushing it a lot, and it's not where it needs to be. So, when you talk about and also the thing to note, what you just pointed out was that to be able to do machine learning, you need volumes of data. That's when the machine starts getting smart, and there aren't too many people who actually do that. But they like to because AI sounds cool, you slap it onto everything.
Right. There's a great book, by the way, by Amy Webb called The Big Nine. It's written for a lay audience. So it's not legal. She barely mentions legal, but it's a great general book for a lay audience. It's called The Big Nine. And it talks about the future of AI. It's very interesting.
And the second thing I have a lot of thoughts on is machine learning should not be used for hiring. It should absolutely not be used for hiring. We use at Hire and Esquire, we use rule-based algorithms, and they're rigorously tested for bias. And we've actually, with our use of soft skills and data, we've seen a 15% increase in women and minority hires since we started using soft skill and data-driven hiring. The only person who really did a true machine learning hiring experiment was Amazon. They had data from 20 years of hiring, and they obviously hire huge volumes of people. So they did an experiment where they tried to use machine learning for resume sorting. What they found is that, which reveals the other reason companies probably don't want to do this, is because it puts them at a lot of liability risk. What they learned is training on the old data, they created a very biased recruiter. Exactly. Yeah, so if it was like a woman's college name, like it learned to kick it out because that's apparently what their actual recruiters have been doing.
Oh
And
boy.
then
Yeah.
a different, what else was it that was interesting? Like basically anytime they tried to adapt it to be like less discriminatory, the machine found a way around it because it had trained on so much data that was basically like disqualifying women and minorities. So I would very much caution anybody against, if you have enough data, training a machine for hiring on past hiring data, because every single study shows hiring to be incredibly biased across the board.
And even on Apple, when Apple launched its card along with Google, apparently they were like, there was enough cases of the same kind of biases showing up because they used historical data, and women were getting money at much higher cost than a guy would, or the limits were much lower than, even if they were doing better.
Yes, exactly. So that's why please never, ever, ever use machine learning for hiring unless it's like 20 or 30 years in the future and they found a way to overcome this. But right now, the few experiments that have been done have been a disaster.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, one good note is I think that, and you sort of alluded to this earlier, corporate legal departments have actually been in the forefront within the legal profession, much better on diversity, really over the last several decades have done far better on diversity than law firms. So that GC should be applauded for that and their staff.
Yes, and I will say too, the law firm world is actually a lot less biased than the venture world, both when you look at the statistics and when you and even anecdotally from my own experience. So law firms aren't the worst. It's like paradise compared to the venture capital world.
That's fair. That's good.
Bias.
Lawyers like to hear positive things said about us from time to time. So thank you. Well, we're very short on time. Maybe one more question if anyone has an additional question, and then we should really I'm sure Julia has a lot to do in the current environment. Well, no more questions.
One thing, Chris, I just thought it might be helpful. Julia talked a little bit about her firm and how they started and kind of what their special features are for both for attorneys that would want to maybe associate with an ALSP, and also on the client side, where are they getting their business from and who could use their services.
Absolutely. Please do. Yeah.
Sure. So kind of to repeat what I said before for framing, we're an online legal staffing platform. And what my goal was, again, I was an attorney. I was involved in the staffing process. I found it to be very antiquated. And I found it to be I was surprised how it had no technology in the process. And it was staffing people pretty much like secretaries were staffed mid-century. My mom was a Kelly girl in the summers between college in the 70s. And basically they were staffing lawyers the same way they were staffing quote unquote Kelly girls in the 70s. So what I built was basically a platform to, in a way, disintermediate the recruiter. We do have a team of recruiters, but wanted to give the attorneys more autonomy in actually finding jobs in their career than having a recruiter who's, often somebody fresh out of law school who didn't pass the bar, be the gateway to their career. So starting with the client side, if you're a law firm, an in-house legal department, or an ALSP, you can sign up online. And we verify everybody going into the system to make sure they can actually use our service. And we actually look at our law firms as well and make sure there's no disciplinary history for like the main partners or anything else. So we verify that it's a client we can work with. And then they can post jobs and search for attorneys. And when they post a job, not only they'll be instantly matched with attorneys that will both be a match based on expertise as well as those soft skills that I talked about. And there's not good or bad soft skills. Like the same soft skill that makes you a great high stakes litigator can make you a horrible M&A attorney. So it's not good or bad, it's matched for the job. And then attorneys can, everyone who's eligible for a job, if you make your profile public, you can also make your profile private. If you're public profile, you'll be matched for a job. Everybody private and public profile people will get messages when a job meets their qualification and they can apply for it. And then you can talk directly to the person hiring. You don't have to worry about a recruiter being in the middle of it. And then everything is billed through our system. The majority of our jobs are flexible, and we act as the employer of record. So we're providing, we're withholding payroll taxes. We're acting as your employer. You qualify for health insurance if you work with us enough. And then the other types of roles are independent contractor. For both roles, we provide professional liability insurance for people working through our platform. And so it basically, for in-house legal departments, I'll tailor it to that since that's this call. If you have somebody going on leave, if you have a lot of overflow work and everyone's working till 2 a.m. finishing contracts, You can find somebody to work a few hours as needed on demand. Also, if you need expert help, we have former GCs, former partners in our system who can often provide expert help or mentorship. That's become popular when you have a young GC thrown in a few years, they're a senior associate and they need some mentoring and help and guidance. That's become a popular use of our platform as mentor attorneys, which is also of note to anyone who wants to sign up, who's looking for a job. And then you work through us in often, I would say, well, in the AM law and Fortune 500, about 18% of our temps are converted to permanent employees. Smaller legal departments often don't have the budget, so they have flex relationships longer. But when you sign up as an attorney, you can work with multiple different clients. You can apply for whatever jobs suit your skill set and your schedule. And our onboarding process, again, is you sign up, we verify you to make sure that you're an attorney in good standing in your identity, that you're not somebody trying to sign up as somebody else. And then we do have a multi-step verification process where we ask for references. We ask you to fill out an assessment. And then we do a structured behavioral interview, and that helps us assess your soft skills so that we can match you with the jobs that will be the best fit for you.
So can I have just a quick follow-up, and then we should probably wrap up to let you get on with your day, Julia. So one company I saw mentioned on the earlier slide was Axiom, and some of what you're saying sounds a little bit like Axiom. So how would your in-house part of your business compare with what Axiom does, if you're comfortable making a comparison?
Sure. I love Axiom. I think it's a great company. They really built the model for high-end non-document review. Not that there's anything wrong with document review. I've done it myself. High-end attorneys that, do things other than document review. So I think they're an amazing brand. And quite frankly, a lot of our attorneys also work for Axiom and some of the other ones. So we have a high volume of people registered with both services. And we work with a lot of in-house legal departments that used to work with Axiom.
Okay.
And what they tell us is everyone seems to say the attorneys at Axiom were great quality. There's two things. We are faster, so you can more easily and directly communicate. You don't have 3 engagement managers and recruiters. And that also makes us more affordable. We're very transparent about our markup and what our cut is. Part of our goal in building this was to make sure that as much of the budget went to the attorney's hourly rate and not a ton went to overhead. So because we use technology, we're a lot more efficient. And again, we work with a lot of legal departments that used to work with Axiom, not because they weren't happy with the attorneys or didn't think the quality was amazing, but they just couldn't afford it anymore.
Right.
So we're definitely a lot less expensive while the attorneys still get paid the same to more. And it's a much more lightweight engagement process that you can do a lot more on your own time without 3 people in the middle.
And my understanding from dealing with Axiom attorneys is that if you try to hire them full-time, there's a rather expensive buyout clause. Is that an easier with you guys than?
Yes. Once again, it's much more affordable. We do a typical conversion fee of a staffing agency, which from what I understand, again, I've never been a client and I don't see their contracts, but what I hear from our clients who switch to us is that it's a lot more affordable and doable than it ever would have been at Axiom. And that's probably why we have such a high conversion rate.
Right. No, that's great. That's helpful. Thank you for I know it's a little uncomfortable to talk about, competition or other players in your space, but it's helpful, I think, to the GCs to understand sort of the differences and what it's like to work with one company or another. So I appreciate that. Well, we better let you go. We actually went 2 minutes over, so apologies for that. But that was tremendous, Julia. We'll put it up on our website probably later tonight, and really valuable, especially right now. And please stay safe and secure, and all of you out there. We have this call every Friday at noon Eastern time. We have different experts coming in to talk about issues that, as we say, when David and I started this, we said we're going to talk about the issues that keep GCs up at night. And now there's more issues than ever that keep us up at night. So really appreciate your time, Julia. And David, as always, great co-host. Thank you so much.
Yes.
And we hope to see all of you next week.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me on.
excellent
Thanks for all the good
presentation.
questions.
Thank you.
Fantastic. I'll stop the recording now. But I should mention, I didn't mention, anyone that wants to know more about In the House, you can go to www.inthehouse.org. And Julia, your company's website, hireanesquire.com.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Thanks again. Bye, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.